God, we're ready. We're ready. And there's something about worship where it's not that God has this ego that he's wanting to be boosted by us worshiping. It's actually us coming to a place where as we worship, we begin to loosen our grip. That if you just keep your worship simple, pure, and step out, even though you might not feel like you might not want to, but as you worship, you often find yourself beginning to loosen your grip on whatever you're holding on to, whatever that problem is or circumstance in your life that it's hard to let go of. It's hard to let that control go. But as we worship, we often find ourselves that grip beginning to loosen. And as that grip loosens, it gives God something to work with. So he won't just barge his way into whatever our problem is. He's waiting for us to release it, to release that grip that we have on whatever that thing is and give it to him. And it often can't happen until we come to a place of worship, because it's a place of surrender. And it's just like Heidi ended right now. It's like, we're ready. We're ready. But that doesn't just happen right away. That happens through a process of worship, which ultimately is surrender and giving him an opportunity to work for our behalf. He wants to. But he wants us to give him that permission. He wants us to loosen it, give it to him. Let's end with a prayer. God, we're ready. We're ready, God. God, I've been holding on to things in my life too tightly. You can't pry it out of my fingers. I've been gripping on to whatever problems I might have, circumstances that I just can't seem to get a hold of, but I don't want to give it to you. And so God, teach every single one of us how, through worship. Pray that every one of us could live a life like Austin was talking about, of worship. God, I pray that you'd open up times in our day, whether it's in the car or in the truck, mornings or evenings, sometime where we could just get away, simply step away from things in our life and worship. God, open up pockets of time in every single person's day. Our worship has to be so much more than just here on Sunday. It's a daily thing. Amen. Amen. I just want to encourage you too, it is when you're worshiping here, it's a different type of worship, but worship in your car, worship in your truck. Yeah, you can sit down. Find those times, even though they might be 5 minutes, short and simple. Keep it that way. Thanks, Andrew. Tim, you're right. There's a lot of people. I feel like I've been coming here for years, but every time I'm up here, I need to introduce myself when I see the group. It's a lot of people I don't know. My name is Jesse. I'm Austin's brother, who was up here earlier, younger brother, and I'm the youth pastor here at the church. I can't remember the last time I spoke here. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but here I am again. So glad to be here. Glad you guys are all here. And the message I wanted to speak about this morning, or the concept I wanted to share, just comes from a verse that I'm going to read right away here. It's a popular verse. You've probably heard this if you've been in church for a while or been in Christian circles for a while. This is a really popular verse or a well-known verse. It's in Hebrews 11, verse 6. This is how I'd like to start. It talks about how to please God. And I want to please God, no different than I want to please my wife, or you might want to, you want to please your spouse or your friends. And I want to please God. And so this verse talks about how to please God in Hebrews 11, verse 6. So it starts out with this way. I have it in the NIV. It says, "And without faith, it is impossible to please God." So right there it says, here's what it takes to please God, faith. And then it breaks it down a little bit more, and it goes into two different parts here. It says, because anyone who comes to him, speaking about God, must believe that he exists. So that's the first thing. In order to show your faith, you got to believe in a God that you can't see. You're going to put your faith out there and believe that I believe there is a God, that he exists. And then it goes on into the second part. And it says, and that he rewards, speaking about God again, he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And a lot of us stop at that first part. It's not too hard, I believe, for me to believe that there is a God. And I believe there's a lot of people that believe that there is a God. But this second part right here has to do with relationship, because he wants to reward those who earnestly seek him, but it requires an action on our part. In other words, I have to earnestly seek him. He wants that relationship with me. And so it's so much more than just there's a God. It's there's a God, and the second thing is he wants a relationship with me. And when I earnestly seek him, he rewards me. He rewards me in so many different ways. But this whole concept of reward is what I'd like to speak about this morning. And it's all throughout the New Testament, is God is a rewarder to those who seek him. We've been having camp meetings, which is our annual meetings under a tent, out here in this yard in the community center for a couple years now. Well, we've been having camp meetings for long before that, but we've been having it here at this location for several years. And I'm guessing a lot of you have been there. We usually come here for a whole week in the month of August and have these special meetings. That's like this, except it's outside. It's under a tent. We bring special speakers in, worship services. It's all throughout the week. And I've been going there for years. And several years ago, I think it was 21. It was whenever we had that monsoon come through here, that tsunami. It just like never stopped raining. I think it was 21. Who was here when we had it? Yeah, most of the people here. I've never seen rain like that in August. I mean, it was just day after day. It just kept raining. We actually had to pull out. We moved out of the tent and finished our camp meetings up here in this building. And I remember like the truck coming to get the porta-johns, and the truck got stuck, and we were worried about our sound equipment. It was starting to flood. We had a coffee stand out there that by the end of the week, it was like it was in a pond. You're just standing there, and there's water everywhere, all throughout the yard there. It just kept raining and raining and raining. I think our slogan that year was "Come like rain," something like that. Never again. It was crazy. It's August. I've never seen rain like that in August here anyway. I mean, we usually have a pretty dry week on that weekend camp meeting. But anyway, that week I was camping. So we open up there's spots in the back where there were campers, and I was camping back in the woods with the youth group, and it was like a hammock village out there. There was a lot of people out there camping, and as it just kept raining, we kept losing campers because it wouldn't stop, and everyone's stuff was getting wet. And I stayed. I have a setup I'm pretty proud of. I was dialed, where I've got this hammock set up. I have a huge rain fly over it. I've got the drip lines on either side. I've got all my stuff hung up. I could have lasted for weeks out there, and I was very comfortable. Rain didn't affect me at all. And so I was very comfortable. We just kept losing campers until finally it was like me and a couple of guys that were left out there in the woods. I think this was maybe like the third or fourth night in. And so that night, most of the guys, there was a couple of youth guys, 14, 15 years old, most of their stuff was soaking wet, and they were looking for somewhere else to sleep. They tried to sleep here in the tent, but even inside the tent, it was soaked. And so we opened up the community room, which is the building right out here by the road, for them to sleep in. And it was a dry place to sleep, but it was a floor like this. I mean, I think it's a concrete floor with thin carpet on it. Not comfortable at all compared to my setup in my hammock. And so I was planning on just opening up the community room, letting those guys sleep up there, and then I was going to slip on down and sleep in my hammock that night. And I just suddenly made the split decision that, you know what, they should probably have a chaperone. Like, should probably just be there with them. I'm camping here with the youth group. I shouldn't just slip away and sleep there. Even though I wanted to, it would have been a lot more comfortable in my hammock. And it was dry. It was a good setup. But I just made the split decision that they should probably have a chaperone. And so I went down, grabbed just the stuff that I needed, and slept up here for the night with the guys. And slept okay, but thought I would have slept better in my hammock. And the next morning, I go down to get the rest of my gear, because I still have a bunch of gear down there. And there is a tree that's, I guess, probably 10 to 12 inches in diameter that had fallen directly across my hammock. Crushed everything. I couldn't believe it. And it was because it had been raining all week long, and everything was so wet and heavy. All the leaves were wet and heavy, and then we got a little bit of wind that night. or I mean, it was a decent amount of wind, but I didn't think it was enough to snap a live tree. It was probably about 30 or 40 feet up. This live tree had just snapped and fallen right dead center across my hammock, ripped the straps. I remember it had a couple of branches, that big around coming off of it that speared through my rain fly so deep down into the ground that I couldn't pull my rain fly out. It was like ripping whenever I'd pull it out. And so it destroyed my hammock, destroyed my rain fly. My pack was still okay. I think there was just one buckle broken on it. Kind of missed that. But I remember looking at that and just thinking, like I would have been sleeping right there. It kind of shakes you up a little bit. And it was just a split, just a quick decision where I'm like, I almost did, but I decided not to sleep down there, and I slept up here. And we were looking at it, and I think we had decided that, like, at best, I would have been severely, like, maybe hospitalized for a while, but probably dead. When I looked at the size of that tree and how it just pummeled everything and drove the rain fly deep into the ground, I mean, it probably would have killed me. And just the thought of, like, that sudden, like, here we're enjoying this great week here at camp meetings. I mean, it's raining, but it's fun. All the people are here. And just that sudden, a tree fell right across my hammock. And I was going to be there that night. I mean, I was that close to being there. I mean, I wasn't. And there's something about that, like, at first I just kind of shook it off. I was like, well, that was close. But then, the more you think about it, and even now, like, the more it kind of sets in where it's like, wow, that was crazy. Like, that is really close. Like, I was just one little decision away from possibly being killed with a tree falling on me. And during that time in my life, when I think about, like, what was surrounding that time in my life, I was, first of all, it made me realize, like, what am I doing? Like, where is my life going? Like, am I ready to die like that? Like, what would have carried on? What would have been left that I've done or created? And it just kind of makes you think differently. And during that time in my life, I was probably more burned out than I ever have been, I think. It was just a crazy summer, and there were a lot of things going on. And I thought that I was burned out during that time in my life because of all the things that I was doing. It was a really busy summer. I had so many different things happening, going on with my work and church and all of that, and I was just tired and burned out. And I've come to realize since then that it's burnout, and I was very much burned out, but I've come to realize that burnout actually doesn't have that much to do with how busy you are. It has more to do with you forgetting the reason for why you're doing what you're doing. It has more to do with your purpose. In other words, I can decide, like, if I can make a decision and say, for example, like, I'm going to get out of debt, or I'm going to pay off this debt in a certain amount of time. Like, let's just create a short time, which means I'm going to work hard, I'm going to put in the hours, and I have this goal of paying off this debt. I can put in a lot of hours at work and actually not be burned out. I can be tired. I can get to the end of the day and be completely exhausted and tired, but not be burned out because I have this goal that I'm putting in front of me. I have this purpose. I have this drive. But burnout is completely different, where your flame really, it burns out. The flame is gone. And I've realized it has less to do with how much you're doing, but much more to do with why you're doing what you're doing. And when I look at that time in my life, I was busy, and I thought that was just the simple reason of why I was burned out. But it was more that I had just forgotten my why. I had forgotten my purpose. I had forgotten to think past just the month ahead. I'd forgotten to look into the future and into my eternity and all of that. And I was burned out because I just didn't have a reason. I'd forgotten my reason. And so that's what really, it's not just that example, but a bunch of other examples too that kind of made me revisit this whole thing about God rewarding us. And God actually has rewards for us here on earth and in heaven that change the way that we live our lives right now. And the more I think about that, the more I think about even my life beyond this life and into eternity and how God has rewards waiting for me based on how I live my life here, it changes the way that I live my life here. And I can live in a way where I don't get burned out because I have this purpose, I have this drive. Yes, I'm working hard, I'm putting in the hours, or I'm just doing many different things, but if I have a reason for doing the things that I do, I don't get burned out. And so I've had to come back to the reason again and just look at, like, what does my life mean? Like, what am I doing with my life? What's going to happen in my eternity more than just, my life here and next month? There's a couple of verses here. I don't have the reference here, but we can actually lay up treasures in heaven. Based on how we live our lives here, we can lay up treasures in heaven. So our here and now can affect what we receive in heaven. It's this whole thing about like what I'm doing now affects my heaven has changed my focus, has changed why I'm doing what I'm doing. I forget it sometimes, but I have to keep coming back around to this. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, a couple verses here. I think it's Paul that's writing. He says, "By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ." So he lays it out first of all and says, each one of you has you're going to be builders. Each one of us is going to be builders. First of all, we start with Jesus Christ. Like that's the entry, that's the doorway is through Jesus. And so it's kind of like the first verse that I just shared here. Anyone who comes to him must believe that he is. And that's our first step. We must start with Jesus Christ. We must first of all, if we're going to build something in our lives, we're going to build it with the foundation on Jesus Christ, meaning we're going to give our lives to Jesus. We're going to start with him. And he says, okay, so that's the foundation. You've given your life to Jesus. It's salvation. And then he says, now the rest is up to you. How do you want to build on that foundation? He says, if anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is. Because the day, capital D, which is like the end of all days, whenever that is, whatever that looks like, there's coming a day that is the day. That day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder, speaking about us, will receive a reward. There's that word reward again. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. So this is not a heaven or hell issue. This is actually beyond that. This is saying that, okay, you've given your life to Jesus, you're going to make heaven. You've started with that foundation. But then there's actually levels, you could say, levels that we have the ability, or levels of reward that we can receive in heaven based on how we live our lives from then on. So it's just the start. So you give your life to Jesus. All right, now you have the rest of your life to build something that could determine different levels of reward that you could receive in heaven. And we don't know. We don't know what that's going to look like in our own lives or in other people's lives necessarily until we get to this day. I did this example a long time ago with, we met with the youth group, and I'm like, I like to see things in pictures and like just makes more sense to me that way. And so I created this scenario where I took, I think it was 2 brown paper bags, a couple of brown paper bags, and I filled those bags with all kinds of random objects. I mean, pieces of trash, threw a few pieces of metal in there, just whatever I could find, stuff that I didn't mind burning. And I just threw a bunch of things in these 2 brown paper bags. And I took these bags to youth group, and then we had this example where I said, okay, pulled 2 volunteers out, and I said, all right, this is your life and this is your life. And we were using the brown paper bags full of the things that I'd thrown in there to represent somebody's life. Looked the same from the outside. You look at 2 brown paper bags, which is also often our lives. You know, we can't tell what's on the inside, just looking at the outside. And then I said, there's coming a day when this bag is going to be on fire. And we took a match, and we lit that bag on fire. And we're just sitting there watching, and we see the bag burn down, burn down, burn down. And of course, pieces of paper, things like that, they're going to burn right up. But the pieces of metal, they didn't. They were still there. And so after we watched these 2 people's lives burn up, we sifted through the ashes, and we just kind of picked apart what was left and pulled out what was left. And that same scenario actually is going to happen in every single one of our lives, where our lives are going to be set on fire. And whatever burnt, whatever is, you know, if there's pieces of paper, different things like that in our life, it will burn. And so I don't quite know how that looks like in every single person's life here, even my own life, but I just know that I want to build a life where it doesn't burn, where things last, where they stay. And so based on what we see there, so based on what we see left after those brown paper bags burn up, actually determines rewards that we are going to receive in the other life, in eternity, is what he's saying right here. In other words, God is actually, in a way, keeping score. He's watching our lives, and he's keeping score of what we do, and there's rewards that are coming after that based on how we live our lives here. There's a couple of verses here that I'd like to read, and they're just cool verses. Proverbs 19, verse 17 says, every time you give, I got it in the Passion Translation, it says, every time you give to the poor, you make a loan to the Lord. Don't worry, you'll be repaid in full for all the good you've done. So it gives this just cool scenario where if you give to the poor, in other words, if you're giving to someone who will never give back to you, you've actually made a loan to God, and don't worry, he's going to be sure to pay you back. It's just, to me, it's a mind-boggling verse where it's like we can actually make a loan to the Lord. He's keeping track. Every time we do that, he's actually keeping track. And he says, don't worry, I've got you. I'll pay you back. There's another couple verses here in Luke 14, and I'm starting around verse 12. The scenario here is Jesus is he's at a dinner table. And I think the setting here seems like it's a pretty wealthy crowd, a pretty prominent crowd. He's at this dinner table, and it seems like it's a pretty nice dinner table, or a nice event, you could say. And so he turns to his host. He has this way sometimes of ruining the dinner conversation or creating awkward situations. And he turns to his host and says, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, verse 12, he says, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors. Basically, I believe he's like implying that's what he just did. He says, don't do this. He says, for they will invite you back, and that will be your only reward. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, which is like the day, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. So he gives us this example of like, if you do this, if you invite these people, your rich neighbors, brothers, friends, relatives, he says they'll invite you back, and that will be your reward. That will be your only reward. So either way, we're getting a reward. We're getting a reward whether we do the first thing he mentions or the second thing he mentions. But the only difference is he says them inviting you back is going to be your only reward. But if you actually put yourself in a position where they can never invite you back, God keeps track of that. And that actually builds all the way to your eternity. And if it transfers over into eternity without you receiving your reward here, God says, I've got it right here. I've got it for you. He's keeping track. He's watching. And Jesus says, actually put yourself in a position where God will pay you back when you get to eternity, where there's a reward waiting for you there. He says very much the same thing here in Luke 6, same book, different chapter. He's talking about money and relationships, and he's kind of transitioning seamlessly back and forth between money and relationships. 6:34 and 35, he says, if you lend money only to those who will repay you, what credit is that to your character? Even those who don't know God do that. And then he starts talking about loving your enemies, so he's going right into relationships. He says, rather love your enemies and continue to treat them well. Then he's back into money again. He says, when you lend money, don't despair if you are never paid back, for it is not lost. You will receive a rich reward, and you will be known as true children of the Most High God, having his same nature. Be like your Father, who is famous for his kindness to heal even the thankless and the cruel. That's again the Passion Translation. Very similar to the verse we just read, where he says, if you give to somebody, whether it's giving kindness or love or money, if you give to someone in that way where you know that you will never get it back, he says it's not lost. It's not lost. That there is a God who's keeping track of that, and he wants to reward you. You will receive a rich reward, he says. It's almost like God has this accounts receivable over our lives. And I just imagine it like he's got this accounts receivable over me where he has my name, Jesse, and then he's got a column that says earth, and he has a column that says heaven. And he's just keeping track. And it's like when I do something, if I receive back based on that thing that I do here on earth, he's like, oh, he's taken care of there, check. But if I do something and I never receive back from that all the way through my life and it makes it into heaven, then God's like, oh, I owe him for that, check. And he settles all of his accounts. But what I want to do after reading these verses is I want to move most of my accounts to where they're not settled here on earth. I want to push them as many as I can into heaven because I believe they gain interest. That when God gives us a reward, it's so much bigger. And it just changes the way I do everything. It can just be simple things like, when you go, and everybody puts money in for, let's just say you're going to buy somebody a gift, and everybody comes together and they buy this one person a gift. But you're the one who's footing the bill because you're the one that's paying, and everybody owes you money. So it's like, all right, everyone just cash up me $50 and we'll be good to go. There's always that one person. You guys know where I'm going with this, who you'll never see money out of. It just doesn't happen. Like every single time there's that one person. If you don't know that one person, you might be the one person. But there's always that one person who I just know I'll never see money come from them. And that can eat me up because I want to see that settled. Like I'm like, man, I'm reminding them and then, oh yeah, I just haven't gotten around to it. And it's just like, it becomes this big deal. I'm just learning to let go of that. Actually, I'm learning to go the other way and be like, I'm not going to remind them. I hope they forget. Because that's going to keep building all the way till heaven. If I make it to heaven without them paying me back, it's going to be a whole lot bigger than $50. It just changes the way I do everything. And I really do believe that's true, where God is keeping track of everything. So if I can give to someone who I know won't give back, man, I don't want them to remember. I want it to go all the way to heaven. And even bigger scenarios, like this is more of a serious example, but if you're in business, and I know a lot of people here they own a business, there will come a time where somebody won't pay you. You'll be screwed over somehow. It's just a matter of time if you haven't experienced it yet. And I'm all for, if you have to, pursuing that legally or putting liens on whatever project you have, especially if that person is doing it multiple times and hurting many people. Like there's a reason that we have that route that we can go and we can pursue justice. But there are times where it's just not worth it, where they owe you money and it's not worth pursuing it somehow legally, where you have to figure out what to do with that. And it's those times that can eat me up, where I just find myself being poisoned by bitterness, and I hate that person, and I just they owe me money and they never pay me back, and I can eat me up. But it's in those times where I can actually come back to these verses and say, wait a minute, they've never paid me back. You know what, I hope they remember to never pay me back. I hope I make it through my whole life without them paying me back. Because I know that God's keeping track. I know that He sees everything, and He's got rewards. If you can live that way, it changes the way you do everything. It changes the way that, it's just it releases something in me where I can give so freely. And I actually find myself putting myself in circumstances where I know that I won't receive back what I've given, and I'm totally fine with it. Because I'm I know God sees it, and He is a rewarder. That's His heart. He's keeping track. He's keeping track. And I want that to go all the way to heaven because, man, I want to be so rich when I get to heaven. I want to have a stack of rewards. So if there's anybody here who owes me money, I hope you've forgotten by now. I want to be so rich when I get there. I want rewards that are waiting for me. I want to live my life here and now on this life and on this earth. It's so short when you think about eternity in another life versus our life here, that it's just not a big deal. If I can come to this, I can come back to this and realize that God is a rewarder, that God ultimately is the one that I want to reward me, and I want Him. I want to please Him more than anybody else here. I want to live my life for Him. So it changes it. It just, again, when I realize that, it changes the way I use my money, my time, relationships. It can be like this weight's lifted off, and I realize that I trust you, God. I trust Him. I know that you've got me. I know that you're watching. Coming back to the first verse that I started with, I want to just give you a challenge. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. If you want to please God, you first of all must believe that He is. Put your faith out there. And I look around this group here, and I'm guessing most people here believe that there is a God. But if you don't, if you've never thought about that much, or if you've never actually made that decision that you believe in God and that you want to give your life to Him, you've got to start there. You've got to believe. Even though you don't see a God, you have to believe. You've got to put your faith out there and believe that, God, I believe that you are real. I believe that you are real. That's where you start. And then the second thing you need to realize is you realize that he wants to have a relationship with you. He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. It takes an action on our part. You have to do more than just believe there is a God. You actually have to pursue him, give your life to him, let him be Lord over your life, and he will reward that. And so I just want to put that challenge out there. Believe there is a God. And then second, pursue him. Seek him. And he will reward you. He promises it over and over again, all throughout the New Testament. If you just look up the word reward throughout and see how many times it shows up throughout the Bible, it's everywhere. I just picked out a couple of verses right here. God truly does. He's that good father who's loving his children, and he wants to give so many good things to them. He wants to reward us. You just have to believe it. Let me end with this verse right here. This is in no way us. When I'm living this way, where I'm doing these things, this is in no way for me to make heaven. I've basically, to make heaven, you simply give your life to Jesus. You simply believe. So I'm not doing all of these things that I've just talked about here, or living this way so that I can make heaven. It's not for salvation. It's actually from salvation. It says it in Luke 14:12 verses 14. Sorry, wrong one. Ephesians 2:9 and 10. Again, the Passion Translation. He says, "So no one will ever be able to boast, for salvation is never a reward for good works or human striving." It has nothing to do with how good we are. It says, "But we have become his poetry. We're a recreated people that will fulfill the destiny he has given each of us. For we are joined to Jesus, the Anointed One. Even before we were born, God planned in advance our destiny and the good works we would do to fulfill it." Even before you were born, there's things that God has placed. There's works, there's good works, there's a destiny, there's things that God has put in front of you for you to discover and for you to tap into all throughout your life. Let's fulfill that. I want to fulfill that in my own life so that when I get to the end of my life and I'm in eternity, that I can look back over my life and realize that I was living for that. I was living for eternity. I was living from a place of knowing that I am covered by the blood of Jesus and that I have received his salvation over my life, and then from there on I'm living for eternity. Let's stand. I'm going to wrap it up right here. I just want you to close your eyes, and if there's anything that, I just talked about, if there's something or someone that's bugging you, they owe you money, or you feel like you've given them your time, you feel like you've stuck your neck out for that person, and they just haven't responded back in the way that you thought they would. Or if you feel like you've given them, money and they were supposed to give back to you and they just didn't, I just want all of us to close our eyes. And I don't know if you can do this in one simple church service, but if there's somebody or a situation like that just has been actually eating you from the inside, you find yourself being poisoned by bitterness or resentment towards whatever that scenario or person is or has done to you, you're going to have to let it go and realize that God ultimately is watching over our lives. And our response to those scenarios, our response to those situations can determine the quality of our forever. God, I want to give in a way where I'm building rewards for the life to come. Whatever that looks like, however that looks like. God, you are a rewarder to those who diligently seek you. I want to be one of those ones who seeks you, who chases after you, who pursues you, who has a relationship with you. And God, I pray the same thing over every single person here, that we could be people who not only have a relationship with you, but who trust you to take care of us. You really do want to. You want to be that good father who answers our questions, who takes care of us. We just have to let you. And God, I pray for a deeper level of surrender for all of us. We could learn what that looks like in our own lives, to live in a place of trust and surrender. knowing that ultimately our life here is so short and our life in eternity is so long. Change our perspective, God. Let us see things through your eyes and with your heart. Amen. Amen. I think I'm going to wrap it up right there unless there's any other announcements. I think there's probably going to be coffee and cookies.